welcome to Nicki Talks. We're continuing our series on domestic violence because October is National Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And today on the show I have Brian King from the North Shore Health Project. Welcome, Brian. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Nicki.
And we're just going to talk a little bit about some of the populations that he works with and how intimate partner violence and domestic violence might impact those populations. So Brian, maybe you could say a little bit about what you do and a little bit about the North Shore Health Project.
Sure.
Yeah.
So the North Shore Health Project is in Gloucester. It's been there since 1988.
Yeah.
It was formed by friends and families of folks living with HIV, or at that point, a lot of people dying from the epidemic. Mm-hmm. So people pooled their resources and supported each other. And then as time went on, they got some state funding to do medical case management, to have therapies like holistic therapies like acupuncture and massage to help people deal with the side effects of the medications, food, nutrition. And now it's also expanded over the last couple of years to include case management for hepatitis C. So people living with hepatitis C or being treated for hepatitis C, and overdose prevention, HIV testing, STD testing, and yeah, it's like mostly harm reduction based.
Yeah.
So we meet people where they're at. It's not, you need to change your behavior, you need to do this thing. We have no judgment. We just
harm reduction means just that, basically.
Yes. Yeah.
And what does can you talk a little bit about the overdose reduction, like that part of the program?
Yeah. So there's we're right downtown behind Passport's restaurant on Center Street. So at 9 Center Street is the one-stop program, and it's a walk-in Monday through Friday. They provide needle exchange and overdose prevention. So if someone wants to get some Narcan, which is the emergency overdose treatment, they can be trained in Narcan by one of the staff there and be giving it. So you can, and it's something we're saying now. It's like a seatbelt. There's so many people, whether they're elderly or whether they're people who are injection drug users. Someone can be using prescriptions, can take too much. So just to have something in the house for those emergencies in your medicine cabinet and know how to use them, I think the more people that have it,
saves lives. It's pretty basic. Yeah.
So my position there is medical case manager for people living with HIV. So I help folks deal with a whole array of issues. So if someone's newly diagnosed, I help them find the right doctor, get connected with any services they might need, do a lot of education so they understand what HIV looks like today. Many times people who are get infected, say this year, might be thinking about what HIV and AIDS was 30 years ago.
Because they just haven't kept up with, because there's been major changes.
Yeah. But things like housing,
I was going to ask about
Social Security benefits, mass health and Medicare, if that's something that they would need. And so I'm on the phone a lot trying to
do you have a big
make
caseload of people? Or is it constantly shifting? Or?
I have like around 40. It stays stable around 40, and some people come and go. It's again a whole range. There's folks that are really thriving with HIV, where it's just one small thing that's part of their life at this point. It's one pill a day and they're good.
Yeah.
Where there are some folks that were infected in the early time of the epidemic and got very, very sick and are still dealing with.
But are still alive.
They're alive, yes, but they might be still dealing with a lot of the health issues that came from that time when we didn't have the best treatment.
Kinds of stuff, right?
Yeah.
That happens, and so in terms of, and then we'll move on, but in terms of when HIV was just a huge epidemic and kind of silent somewhat for a long time, when do you, how would you say HIV was at its most sort of silent, virulent, deathly? Like when would that have been in the late 70s, early 80s?
Well, it started in the early 80s is when the
Early
epidemic
80s.
really hit.
Okay.
And then by the late 80s, early 90s, it was really at the height. Where
Okay.
people were,
dying.
I mean,
Yeah.
everywhere.
Yeah.
I remember once at Captain Carlos talking to Whoopi Goldberg, who told me she lost 70 friends in a few months. At that point, I mean, it was awful. And then protease inhibitors were developed, and those were the first medications that really seemed to work and extend people's lives. And then it started turning things around. But those medications came with a lot of side effects and a lot of other harm, and it was hard on the liver and the kidneys, and and then you had to take like 40 pills a day or something. So it was still a lot to manage, but
onerous,
But that was the turnaround for.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, we know that domestic violence and intimate partner violence affects everybody, regardless of gender or ethnic background or age. And so specifically, we're going to talk about this population that comes to the Health Project. So I thought it might be helpful to just look at the language around LGBTQ and transgendered, transsexual. We don't have to go deeply into it, but I know that people sometimes hesitate to get into conversations about this because they feel awkward with the language. So maybe you could say a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think there's a great performance artist named Taylor Mack who said, the LGBTQIA language is sort of like the tax code. It changes every year.
Yeah,
but,
that's helpful.
No,
that's probably right, too.
And I think the most important thing is that, it's okay to make mistakes. It's just let yourself make mistakes, but to stay curious and to care. I once heard a story from a woman who's a cardiologist who said she was speaking at a conference, a medical conference, in front of all of her peers, and she was someone, I think she worked at like Harvard or Yale or something. I mean, she was a pretty accomplished person.
Right.
And she was presenting research about LGBT and aging and heart health. And she got on the stage and said, I'm about to present my research about LGBT aging and heart health, and a doctor in the front row said, "What's LGBT again?"
Right.
And just the dismissiveness hit her, and she said, "Here I was, this accomplished lesbian in the medical field, and I immediately went into shame. I got into this place like I was a little kid who wasn't allowed to take up space and thought, I don't have a right to be here. These people don't want to hear what I have to say." And she thought, I'm feeling this. Like, she worked through it and got through it. She said, but if I'm feeling this, what is a trans woman of color who's in a shelter feeling? Who has all this other stuff on her shoulders. And then walks in and someone says like, what are you, he, she, what do I need to do? And like, okay, now I have to do this again, and so I think I think folks should know that it's okay to make mistakes, and but if you're trying, you're making an effort, you care, that's what comes through. Like, oh, I said the wrong word, and well, let me know what is the word again, or I really want to get this right. Is a different attitude as opposed to being dismissive, because that just communicates, I don't respect you, you don't deserve respect.
Or shut down, because that's what I certainly have seen. People don't even engage because they feel, like they don't know what to say.
Yes. So I would say make the effort rather than stay silent, because that can also communicate, like, we don't care enough to address this.
And so we talked earlier about some of the terms. And you were saying, I just did an hour-long training on these terms. So I realized that we can't cover everything, but maybe you could just talk a little bit about a few terms that you feel are important for people, and they can still do their homework.
So if we went to the LGBTQ, L stands for lesbian. So female-identified women who are attracted to other women spiritually, romantically. I always say there's exceptions. There are many women I know who don't like the term lesbian and prefer gay.
Sure.
Which is the next one, which is G, which is gay. primarily that's men who identify as, you know, whose sexual orientation and romantic orientation are towards same sex. And then B for bisexual. Bisexual doesn't mean people want to sleep with every single person who walks by. That's
all
some
at
sort
once?
of, I don't know where that comes from.
There is a thing
it's just
about
like,
that, yeah.
I know bisexual people who are in monogamous marriages
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
a person of the opposite sex
Right.
or the same sex.
Right.
It's,
Right.
you know, just because someone's heterosexual doesn't mean they want to sleep with everyone in the opposite
exactly.
sex. And then the T is sort of the umbrella term of transgender, which includes anyone whose gender is different than that they were assigned at birth, and that can include a whole range. It's not just male or female, but it can also include folks who are non-binary. Binary meaning like here's male, here's female. It's very, very rigid.
Yeah.
I think in reality we know that's not true. There are masculine women and feminine men and the whole range in between of what that even means. So transgender is a good umbrella term. But at the end of the day, it's what people, the language they use for themselves. There's gender queer. The Q can stand for queer or questioning. Queer is a reclaimed word, so people hear that as negative. That was
right. That's an interesting thing because you do hear it much more, and it's in a non-negative context.
I think it's I think about when I was young. People would drive by and yell queer out the window. They still do sometimes, but
faggot. That was the word everybody used.
Right.
Yeah.
And I once made a shirt that said fag on it.
Oh yeah.
And so when someone would drive by and say that, I would just turn and be like, hey.
Yeah.
Like, so I reclaimed it.
That's exactly.
It's not a negative thing. You may think it's negative, but that's on you. It's not.
Yeah. That's
whatever.
Exactly right. Yeah.
So that's where why the word queer has come back to be reclaimed. And I think it's been in the vernacular for so long that there are young people who identify as queer who've never heard it as a negative.
That. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. And what's the I? What'd you say? A?
Well, there's I, which can be intersex. So those are people who are when born. The typical patterns that a doctor would use to determine if someone is male or female, they're for their sex, their biological sex. There's a certain percentage of people that don't fall into either category, and it used to be the normal procedure would be to medically turn that child into a girl because that was the easiest thing to do. Right. We don't do that anymore, or it's not recommended because you don't know until the person goes through their puberty really how they feel about their gender generally. So if someone's basically medically forced into one, it could be the wrong one.
Yep.
So that's the I, and then A can be ally. So,
okay. Yeah, that I didn't know.
Yeah, so someone who, it's a little more
good.
than saying, oh, I have a gay cousin and he's cool.
I know someone who's gay.
Right.
That kind of thing.
And more like you actually put your money where your mouth is, and you show up and you vote in a certain way to make sure that the rights of LGBT people are honored, and you do the work. That would be a true ally. In any case, no matter what. If it's something that doesn't affect you, but you are there to make sure that it doesn't, other people aren't being harmed, you're an ally. But also asexual, which, some include in it, some don't, but that's the idea that maybe don't have a sexual orientation or are not interested in sex. And there's definitely a percentage of people who still, might get married and have kids, and but it's not their natural orientation.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, that's interesting. So in terms of domestic violence, and I forgot to mention that Brian is also a member of the Gloucester Coalition for the Prevention of Domestic Abuse. So he knows what he's talking about here. And I wonder if you could reflect a little bit about how you feel domestic violence or intimate partner violence specifically impacts this population, and what are some of the maybe increased risk factors?
Well, maybe I'll just jump back
Yeah,
because
sure,
there's
sure.
two that I could talk about. One would be since I'm an HIV case manager,
Right.
with people living with HIV, there's still a lot of stigma out there around HIV status, even though we know if first of all that everyone should be treated with dignity and respect, no matter what if their health
Place
issues
to start,
are.
right? Right.
But there's still a lot of stigma and misinformation about HIV. So a lot of folks don't know that if someone's living with HIV and they're taking their medications and they're undetectable, they can't transmit the virus to anyone else. Most new infections from HIV happen when one of the partners doesn't know that they have HIV.
So
that's when they're most infectious.
I'm going to restate that to make sure I understand it, and also it seems important for people to understand that. So what you're saying is that if a person is HIV positive but is taking medications, I don't know if that's specific medications, and will not transmit the virus to a sexual partner.
Right. So if they are undetectable, which many of my clients have been undetectable for years because they adhere to their medications. Not everyone can do that. Some people.
That was the word,
yeah. So the virus there's so little virus in the blood and in the body that there's not enough to transmit. So a lot of times, so some if you're looking at partners and you say, "Are you HIV positive?" and the person says yes, and like someone goes, "Well, I'm not."
Yeah, sure, yeah.
But then someone else says, "Oh, no, I'm not." And then it doesn't follow up with, well, when's the last time you were tested? And, how do you know?
Right.
If you're just like, okay, you just take it for granted that they're telling the truth.
Yep.
That is where the risk is. Because someone living with HIV, if you say, oh, well, how are you doing? You take your medications, are you undetectable? Yeah, I was, had my test a couple weeks ago. Because people get tested regularly to make sure that the medications are still working. Every 3 months, every 6 months, but it's becomes pretty stable if the medications are working. So when it comes to domestic violence or intimate partner violence, someone can exploit the stigma because there are people who are don't disclose their HIV status because
choose not to.
They choose not because of the discrimination or the misinformation that's out there. So someone can say, "Well, I'm going to tell everybody if you don't do this or that." It's a way of using power and control. Withholding medications is a way that sometimes people will abuse a partner with HIV. So those are the two major ones. Where someone literally is holding hostage your medication, because if you take that away, when someone's off medications that they've been on for a while, the virus can become smart and mutate and then become resistant to those medications. So that's a real danger. It's not even that you're going to get sick, is that then that medication will stop working for you. So those are some things that I've heard have happened. And that can also be with, it's not just into partners, it can also be family members. Can use that, there's, if someone's, say, like a grandfather with HIV and is playing with the kids, and then in the neighborhood, and then the son or daughter says, well, if you don't do A, B, or C, I'm going to tell the whole neighborhood and they won't let you play with the kids anymore, and the kids won't be coming over to the house, so there's, that can be
well, even, in this day and age,
insidious.
It seems ridiculous, but that works also, that same scenario would work with somebody saying, who has not shared publicly their sexual preferences or orientation, they can also be outed in that way, right? Like the same grandfather is gay, and suddenly the moms say, oh, I'm going to let him play with my...
Right. So that's a great segue into the LGBT intimate partner violence. That is definitely one of the ways that if someone's not out to their family, say they have a really religious, conservative family that would reject them, and they don't want to deal with that. The partner can threaten, to out them.
As a way to maintain that control piece.
Or prevent that person on the opposite end from having community. Because we, with LGBT folks, often deal with so much stigma and prejudice just in daily life, that
Yeah.
community is hugely important. We feel stronger when we're around people that have had similar experiences. And
Sure, like all of us.
support each
whatever.
other.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
partners might prevent.
Yeah, those connections.
Yeah, prevent those connections is a way that abuse can happen. So,
What do you think about, this is a little bit of a segue, but what do you think about the environment currently, without getting too political, just the environment for LGBT people right now, and what kind of shifts have you seen over even the last, 4 to 6 years, 10 years, 2 years?
I can't. I mean, I can talk about my own experience, but I
Yeah.
don't know what it's like for someone, say, living, in Western Mass versus here
Or Kentucky.
versus Kentucky,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's different for everybody depending on what family they're in, what town they're in.
Yeah.
But as far as recent history, I feel like in many ways things are getting better.
Yes.
I just, from what I hear, what's happening in schools and gay-straight alliances, and
Yeah.
that didn't exist when I was young. I
No.
mean, it was.
Yeah, that's very positive.
There were teachers who were bullies, with the other kids that were saying stuff. They would repeat what they were saying. I mean, it was amazing that was happening.
The teachers repeating what the bullying kids were saying.
Yeah.
Yeah,
but
disturbing.
that's 30 years ago. So I think things have changed, and I don't want to diminish that. And people have done a lot of work.
So important,
I think
right?
parents seem to be so much more aware. I know. I mean, I have a cousin whose husband is, he's a very butch guy.
Yeah.
And I remember one of his sons took the doll of his sister and was sleeping with it, and he came in and thought he had stolen it from the sister, took it without her permission, so was going to take it away, and he started crying. And then and then his wife, my cousin, said, "Oh, no, she said he could play with it." And he went, "Oh," he's like, "Oh no, now he's going to think I took the doll away because boys aren't supposed to have dolls, and that's not what I wanted to do."
It's going to be damaged for life.
So just the fact, the speaker, no, my son can play with dolls if he wants.
Yeah.
It's a free country.
Yeah. Love it.
He had a very different
Yeah.
attitude than probably someone his position would have had 30 years ago. So,
Yeah. And
so I think things have changed.
And you see boys going to school in whatever they want to wear. That has changed, I think, somewhat.
And and a whole range of gender expression, because I believe it's mostly a social construction. So how people express their gender is really personal and individual. But I also think there's been a backlash because folks who've been put down and oppressed, be they people of color, be they women, people, LGBT folks, immigrants, people who are done being oppressed, are rising up and saying this isn't okay.
Yeah.
So then you have the backlash of well, where are you coming from?
Yeah.
Aren't we all just the same? And it's well, we are in some levels, but these oppressions really exist. These are people are really dealing with racism. They're being denied jobs or housing because of what they look like, and that does happen. So I think the backlash is sort of denial, that this even happens. So, and I think that's being fueled because it's
yeah. Do you think that people in this population are less apt to seek help? I mean, for example, if I'm a lesbian woman or a gay man, or that I might be more hesitant to, either call a domestic violence hotline or go seek assistance at a. Do you think?
Yeah, I think because people have dealt with such discrimination, that sometimes when you have a partner, you feel safe that you even have a partner, and you kind of I've already lost my family because of this. This is my one sort of lifeline, even though I'm being abused. You might not even recognize that. You might just think that this is this is how it is. So I do think it's true that people are afraid of seeking help sometimes because they've experienced discrimination in the system.
Yeah.
And you know, we're in Massachusetts. We think we're liberal and
that's
great,
right.
but you know, there are, you know, it's still happening in healthcare systems, and
oh, it is.
yeah,
I'm sure you're right about that.
One thing I did want to mention is, you know, historically, also many people who are in those relationships have sought help for domestic violence and been denied throughout history. So that's we've come a long way.
Yes.
I think specifically Hawk has done a lot of work around that locally, but a thing that can be tricky, because when it's a man and a woman, often the assumption is made that the man is the perpetrator.
The aggressor, right.
And sometimes it could be a little bit more nuanced with same-sex couples.
That's one of the great complications and police have to be trained so that they know how to respond to that kind of situation.
And sometimes the perpetrator is the one who's seeking the help.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I know you guys have experienced that, and trying to figure that out.
Sort through that. Yeah, and the police, you know, they they use the language primary aggressor to try to figure out, okay, so which person, you know, let's say both people are hurt.
Yeah.
You know, it's really, really complicated, really difficult. So we only have a couple of minutes left, and I just wanted to end with maybe you helping people understand, I guess, two things. Helping people understand how they can really be an ally, like how do you sort of step up and actively become an ally, and also what is it that most importantly you feel that people need to understand about domestic violence and these populations that we're discussing.
Right. Well, the first thing I think when it comes to LGBT folks, if you want to be an ally, just to take some inventory, like, do I know, you know, what these folks are talking about? Do I understand? You know, we all have the tools. We have smartphones. We can Google.
The Google.
You don't always have to call up the gay friend and be like, "Teach me." You know, sometimes you can teach yourself. You know, you can, if you have your questions. You know, they're out there. Read some articles. And then, I mean, that's important. And as an ally, I said before, like showing up, you know, to rallies. Or just being a good friend and understanding that that discrimination is real, not dismissing it when someone says, you know, they've experienced some prejudice or they're feeling some shame that's been, you know, put on them by society. Like listening and not immediately jumping to like, I got to fix this, because it's real. You know, it's a real burden. It's kind of the difference
between sympathy and empathy a little bit.
Yeah,
that's part of it. And I think also always part of it is your own inner discriminate, your own stuff, you know, that you have to recognize and deal with and get through it. And that's always the hardest for most people, I think.
Yeah, I think we don't want to look at our own stuff. And this is something I love saying when I'm in a room full of people, because I think it kind of diffuses stuff. I say, I'm gay and I'm homophobic. And everyone goes, wait, what? Huh? And I say the same reason, because I grew up in a society that has denigrated gay people.
That's exactly
I learned
what
that language growing up, so I've internalized some of it. I've come a long way, but it still shows up, and I feel like it's
not
the same,
unlike racism.
Yeah, it's the same thing. I feel like I'm not a racist. It's like, well, can we acknowledge that we grew up in a society, a country that was built on slavery, and you know that we've learned that language. So you know, don't just deny it.
No,
doesn't mean that you're an awful person. It just means that, you know, you should be open to the fact that you might have some opinions that aren't based in reality or are based in what you've been taught, and you know, be open to look at them.
It's like owning your own, you know, stuff. Yeah. Well, thank you very much. Really appreciate you coming,
Nicki.
Brian.
Thanks for having me.